When I got home, there was an ambulance parked right in front of the house. The yard was packed with neighbors. A nurse ran out shouting, "They're stuck together. We can't pull them apart." I froze when I realized the man was my son-in-law, and the woman next to him wasn't my daughter. Before I could make sense of it all, my daughter walked up, looked me straight in the eye, and quietly said, "Dad, I just replaced their lube with glue." Before I go on with the story, hit that subscribe button and tell me where you're listening from. I still remember that morning so clearly, the day I realized everything in my family had already started to crack long before. After the ambulance left, the whole neighborhood was buzzing. Whispers, stares, people pointing fingers. And me? I just stood there in the yard, frozen. Couldn't say a word. Everything happened too fast, too unreal. But one thing I knew for sure, my daughter Emily wasn't that fragile little girl anymore. And I, her father, hadn't seen the storm brewing inside her. Emily was my only child. Her mom passed away in an accident when she was little, and since then it's just been the two of us, in that small house by the Charleston coast. I taught literature at the local high school for almost 30 years. Emily studied design and opened a small flower shop downtown. That shop was her world, the place where she arranged her first bouquets. The place where Aaron, the man who would become her husband, once came to buy flowers when he proposed. Aaron seemed kind back then, hard-working, a technician at a local electronics company. I still remember the first time I met him standing in the garden with a bunch of purple tulips shaking so badly he dropped half of them. Emily laughed, and I felt at peace. Who would have thought just a few years later that same man would betray the daughter who loved him with everything she had? I first noticed something was wrong when Emily stopped cooking dinner. The kitchen, once filled with the scent of vanilla and fresh bread, felt cold and empty. At night, she'd sit in the living room staring at the ocean in silence. When I asked, she just said, "I'm just tired, Dad. Work's been a lot lately." But I knew my daughter. Her eyes had never learned to lie. Then one afternoon, while I was cleaning my old desk, Emily walked in. In her hand was a printed photo ink, still wet on the edges. In the picture, Aaron holding a blonde woman, right inside Emily's flower shop. The room went so quiet, I could hear my heart pounding. All I could say was, "Sweetheart, what are you going to do?" Emily looked at me, her eyes red, but her voice calm and cold. "Nothing. I won't cry, but they'll remember this day. Forever." I wanted to stop her, to tell her to breathe, to wait. But her eyes, there was something in them. She wasn't that 18-year-old girl running home to show me her test scores anymore. That look belonged to someone who had already died a little inside. That night I heard soft footsteps from the garage. I looked out the window, the light was on. Emily sat alone at my old workbench, the one I used for fixing furniture. On the table were things I didn't expect to see: a bottle of epoxy glue, a pair of gloves, and a small silver tube. I recognized it, the same kind Aaron kept in his car. I thought about going down, but her hands were trembling, and her eyes were hollow. So I quietly closed the door. Told myself she was just cleaning up. But deep down I was scared, because for the first time I couldn't read my own daughter's heart. The next morning, Emily was up early as usual, made coffee, asked what I wanted for breakfast. Everything felt too normal. "Did Aaron already leave for work?" I asked. "Yes," she said, short, steady. As I walked past his car parked in the driveway, I noticed something glinting in the trunk, that same silver tube. I didn't open it, but a chill ran down my spine, like I was standing on the edge of a cliff, one step away from the fall. All day she stayed at her shop. I went to an old teacher's reunion at school, but my mind couldn't stay there. All I could see was my daughter, sitting under that yellow light, epoxy glue in her hands. By the time I got home, dusk had fallen. The door was half open, and the air smelled of sea salt and lavender from her shop. Emily was sitting on the couch, calmly flipping through a magazine. I asked, "Are you okay, honey?" She smiled faintly. "Dad, I've thought it through. Things will balance themselves out. Sometimes justice doesn't need a gavel." I didn't fully understand what she meant. but the way she said it, slow, quiet, and firm, sent a chill through me. I wanted to believe she was just angry. But deep down I knew when someone loves deeply and gets betrayed, they're capable of things you'd never imagine. That night I couldn't sleep. Outside, the sea wind howled through the roof cold as winter steel, and downstairs, the light in the garage was still on, a quiet sign that the storm was coming. That night I barely slept. The light from the garage seeped through the cracks in the door, faint beams sweeping across the ceiling like shallow breaths in a tense room. I heard the soft clink of metal, then silence. A silence so thick, I could almost feel my daughter's anger rising in the dark. By morning, Charleston was wrapped in fog. I went to the kitchen, made some coffee, tried to act normal. Emily was already up, hair tied back, face calm, no trace of tears. She slipped on her coat, getting ready to leave. "Heading out this early?" I asked, trying to sound light. "I've got work at the flower shop," she said without looking at me. Before walking out, she turned and added softly but certain, "Don't worry, Dad. Everything's going to be fine." The door closed, leaving me alone with the bitter smell of coffee. I sat there staring at the rising steam and felt a chill crawl up my spine. I didn't know what fine meant anymore, but I was sure it wasn't the peace I was hoping for. About an hour later, Aaron's car pulled up at the end of the street. He was still in his work shirt, moving quickly like he'd forgotten something. I watched from the window as he opened his trunk, bent down to search, then froze as if catching a strange scent. He looked around, then quietly shut the trunk. Around noon, Emily came home holding a brown paper bag. I noticed the logo from the same hardware store I used to visit. She walked past me without a word straight to her room. Drawers opened, something clicked, the sound of an epoxy lid being twisted off. I moved toward her door, hand on the knob, then stopped. In that moment, I felt like a stranger in my own home. Later that afternoon, I was watering the chrysanthemums in the yard when my phone buzzed. A text from Emily: "Dad, if anyone asks, just say I went home early to handle inventory. I'll stop by Aaron's place for a bit." I stared at that message for a long time. For a bit. Such harmless words. Yet they felt like a warning. When did my daughter start hiding things from me? When did her voice turn so cold? Like tempered steel, I drove over to Aaron's neighborhood. The sun was setting, golden light dripping through the oaks. Emily's car was parked by the curb. Aaron's door was slightly open. I stayed in my car, heart pounding so hard it hurt. After a while, Emily came out, her face expressionless. She checked something on her phone, then smiled faintly. And that's when I saw it, a streak of dried resin on her hand. Epoxy glue. The same kind I used to fix our old furniture. That night I tried to talk to her. "Emily, I just need to know. Are you doing something you'll regret?" She looked up, her eyes softening for a moment. "Dad, regret is for people who've never been betrayed. I don't need it." Her words, they crushed me. I couldn't tell if she was seeking justice or just trying to silence her pain. But one thing was clear. She was preparing for something. And even as her father, I couldn't stop her anymore. The next day, Aaron didn't come home. Neighbors said they saw his car parked behind his shop lights on all night. Emily stayed quiet, pretending not to care. But I caught the flicker in her eyes every time someone mentioned his name. By Tuesday afternoon, I got home early. On the workbench in the garage lay Emily's phone. The screen was still on a security video. Aaron, holding a blonde woman in front of Emily's flower shop. Petals of carnations, the ones Emily grew, stuck to their lips. I looked around. The epoxy was gone. That night, Emily came home late. Said she'd closed the shop early because she wasn't feeling well. I looked at her for a long time, but no words came out. Only later, when she'd gone to bed, did I notice that faint chemical smell lingering in the air. Epoxy. It reminded me of all the things I'd fixed over the years: tables, chairs, picture frames. Everything could be glued back together. But a woman's heart once broken, There's no glue strong enough for that. I sat in the dark listening to the distant waves crash against the shore. And one thought kept echoing in my mind. If someone gets hurt tonight, it won't be Emily. And sure enough, just before dawn, the whole neighborhood woke to the sound of ambulance sirens coming from Aaron's house. The ambulance siren tore through the calm morning air of Charleston. I was just about to step outside when I saw neighbors running, some shouting, others holding up their phones to record. In an instant, our quiet seaside street, once filled only with waves and gulls, turned into chaos. As I moved closer, red and blue lights flickered across the misty pavement. The ambulance stopped in front of Aaron's house. The door was wide open, thin smoke drifting out from the bathroom. Somewhere in the crowd, a woman screamed. I pushed my way through, heart pounding so hard I could hear it in my ears. A paramedic came out pale-faced, shouting, "Move back! They're stuck together." I froze. Those words scraped through my mind like metal on glass. I wanted to believe I'd misheard, but when two medics carried the stretchers out, there was no denying it. On one stretcher lay Aaron, my son-in-law, face white as chalk, drenched in sweat, a blanket hastily covering him. Next to him, clinging to him, was that same blonde woman I'd seen in the video. They couldn't be separated. Their skin, wrapped in strips of cloth, was fused together like it had been welded with resin. I stood there speechless. It felt like watching a nightmare come to life. And then I saw Emily. She wasn't crying. She wasn't shouting. She just stood there, hands clasped, eyes calm, frighteningly calm. When I stepped toward her, she whispered, "Dad, I told you. They'll remember this day forever." A cold shiver ran through me. What I'd feared for days had finally happened. Police arrived within minutes. They took notes, snapped photos, and loaded the two of them into the ambulance. A middle-aged doctor shook his head and muttered to a colleague, "This stuff sticks like epoxy. We might need to operate layer by layer to separate them." I felt my knees weaken. As the ambulance pulled away, I turned to Emily. She was still watching, her face blank, unreadable. I took her arm, trying to lead her home before the neighbors could hear too much. "Emily, what have you done?" She looked at me, her voice steady and low. "I didn't hurt anyone, Dad. I just let them face themselves." I didn't know what to say. Maybe to her this was justice. To me, it was the razor's edge between revenge and sin. By afternoon, the news had already spread. The local paper ran the headline, "Strange accident in Charleston, couple hospitalized after being glued together." Social media exploded. People joked, speculated, laughed. But to me, it wasn't a story. It was the collapse of a family and the helplessness of a father. That evening, I sat alone in the living room. Outside, the ocean still whispered against the shore. Inside, Emily's words echoed in my mind. "I don't need regret." Then the phone rang, a number I didn't recognize. "Mr. Richard Bennett," a tired male voice asked. "I'm Dr. Phillip from County Hospital. You need to come right away." When I arrived, the hallways gleamed under harsh white lights. Even the sound of footsteps felt heavy. Inside the ER, Aaron lay motionless, his torso and hips wrapped in thick white bandages. Beside him was the blonde woman, her face twisted in pain. Dr. Phillip pulled me aside, lowered his voice. "Mr. Bennett, honestly, this is one of the strangest cases we've seen. The epoxy reacted to body heat, fusing the contact points. It took us over 3 hours to separate them with a special solvent." I swallowed hard. "They're alive." "Yes, but they'll never forget this experience." I stepped out into the hallway and leaned against the wall. Emily was sitting on a waiting bench, her coat still dusty. When she saw me, she stood, gave a faint smile. "See, Dad, I didn't have to scream, didn't have to hit anyone. I just let them stick to each other, the same way they stuck to their own guilt." I couldn't answer. I just looked into her eyes, once clear as the sea, now dark and deep like the ocean after a storm. Finally, I whispered, "Emily, revenge won't make you feel lighter. She gave a sad little smile. But at least now I'm not the fool who got lied to. We left the hospital in silence. Streetlights shimmered on the water, long, trembling streaks of gold. The air carried salt and a faint chemical tang. And I knew from that moment on, nothing would ever be the same. When we finally got home, the old clock on the wall struck midnight. Its second hand kept ticking. But to me, time had stopped right there in that moment, when justice, pain, and love melted together into something no one could ever pull apart again. After that night, Charleston seemed to hold its breath. News of the strange accident that left two people glued together spread everywhere. Newspapers, radio, TV, even the small local stations couldn't stop talking about it. I'd never seen this quiet little town so restless. And painfully, my daughter's name sat right in the middle of the storm, though no one really knew the story behind it. That morning, I took Emily to the police station as they requested. No handcuffs, no formal charges, just a witness statement. The interrogation room was cold, its white light washing every bit of color from her face. The officer across from us spoke gently, but curiosity flickered in his eyes. "Miss Bennett, do you know why your husband ended up stuck to that woman?" Emily tilted her head slightly, her voice soft but steady. "I only know he keeps personal things in his car. As for what happened in there, maybe you should ask him." I saw the corner of the officer's mouth twitch somewhere between surprise and frustration. She wasn't lying, but she wasn't innocent either. There was no footage of her doing anything, no signs of break-in. Everything was too neat, too clean. When we walked out, Emily smiled faintly. "See, Dad, justice doesn't always need a gavel." I didn't know whether to be proud or terrified. That afternoon, I went to the hospital. Reporters were blocked at the gates, cameras flashing through the glass. Inside the hall smelled of antiseptic and fatigue. Through the window of a recovery room, I saw Aaron motionless, bandaged from chest to thigh, eyes closed. Dr. Phillips spotted me and came over quietly. "Mr. Bennett?" "He's awake, but not in good shape." "Mentally," he said. "The woman's worse. We had to transfer her to another hospital. Severe skin burns." I stepped closer. Aaron's eyes fluttered open, just long enough to recognize me. He tried to turn away, but his body wouldn't move. In his eyes, I saw not just pain, but shame. I sighed. "Aaron, I once thought of you as my own son. I don't know what happened between you two, but betrayal, that's a stain that never washes out." He didn't answer, just turned toward the wall. I left the room feeling heavier than ever. Behind me, I could hear the doctors murmuring, "Never seen anything like it. Epoxy resin. It fuses with real skin. Nearly impossible to separate without surgery." Their words chilled me to the bone. That night, I came home late. Emily was in the kitchen sitting before a cup of tea gone cold. The light above cast a long, thin shadow across the floor. "Are they okay?" she asked calmly. "They're alive," I said, "but they'll carry scars. For life." Emily nodded slowly, her eyes distant. "I just wanted them to know how it feels not being able to pull away even for a second. That feeling, it's the same as trying to forget and failing." I sat across from her, silent for a long moment. "Do you feel any lighter now?" I asked. She looked past me into nowhere. "Lighter? No, Dad. They're the ones in pain now. I'm just empty." Her words sank into me like stones. People can imagine the rage of betrayal, but few understand the emptiness that follows once the anger burns out. Emily was a shell now existing, but hollow. The next day, a reporter came to the door. He asked if I wanted to share anything about the case. I said, "Everything begins when people lose trust. And sometimes, they try to balance the scales in their own way." The quote made the paper the next morning. Public opinion split right down the middle. Some called Emily a brave woman who taught a cheater a lifelong lesson. Others called her a twisted avenger. But Emily didn't care. She didn't read the papers, didn't leave the house. Every evening, she just sat by the window staring out at the sea. I knew then my daughter had won a small battle, but lost the greatest one of all, the battle with herself. A few weeks later, the police called. Not enough evidence to charge Miss Bennett. Case ruled as accidental. I hung up, looked at my daughter. She gave a faint smile. See, Dad, everything balances out in the end. But there was no joy in her voice, only exhaustion. I realized then, some wounds never heal no matter how strong the glue. Outside, the sea wind blew softly. Our little house by the Charleston shore stood still as if it had never seen the storm pass through. But for me, since that day, peace has been nothing more than a distant memory. After that call from the police, I thought everything was finally over. But the truth is, nothing ever really ends. The silence after a storm can be heavier than the storm itself. In the days that followed, our little house by the sea seemed to return to normal, at least on the surface. Every morning I still made coffee and Emily would sit on the porch gazing out at the sunlit water. But between us, there was a quiet space that words couldn't fill. Since the incident, she hadn't mentioned Aaron once. She closed her flower shop, brought all her tools home, and spent her days growing new kinds of flowers she'd never tried before. One morning I asked, "Why don't you reopen your shop?" Emily answered softly, "I don't want to sell flowers anymore, Dad. I just want them to live, not be cut, not be given away to someone else." I understood. She wasn't really talking about flowers, she was talking about herself, about love that was taken, broken, and never returned. Sometimes the neighbors still looked at us strangely, some with pity, others with quiet laughter when they mentioned that glued-together accident. In a small town like Charleston, no secret stays buried for long, not even the painful ones. I still heard whispers at the market, "Bennett's daughter. Scary, huh? Bet that husband can't show his face around here again." I pretended not to hear, but each word felt like a tiny needle in my chest. Aaron left town not long after he was discharged. I heard he moved to another state carrying a long scar across his hip, a scar the doctors said would never fade. The blonde woman lost her job and disappeared soon after. Everything ended so quickly. No one even had time to breathe. One evening I saw Emily sitting on the porch holding her old wedding photo. It used to hang on our living room wall, but after what happened, she quietly took it down. "Dad, do you think I was wrong?" she asked, still staring toward the horizon. I sat beside her silent for a while, then said, "I don't know what's right or wrong anymore, Emily. I just know, once you choose to end something, there's no going back." She smiled, not sadly, not happily, just quietly. "I know, but at least they learned what punishment feels like. And me, I just want to forget." She folded the photo, placed it in a small wooden box, and locked it. After that night, she never mentioned Aaron again. By the next spring, Emily reopened her shop, but it no longer bore the name Bloom and Promise. The new sign simply read, "Second Chance," by Emily Bennett. When I asked her about it, she smiled. "I think everyone deserves a second chance, Dad. Even me." As she worked again, she began to look more like the daughter I once knew, gentle, calm. But something in her had changed. She no longer believed in perfect love, only in endurance. I saw it in every bouquet she made. No more bright red roses, just wildflowers, simple and strong, the kind that survive salt winds and cold nights. One afternoon, as I was helping her clean up, Emily placed a bouquet in front of me. "Dad, can you take this to Charleston Hospital, the one where Dr. Phillip helped separate them? I just want to say thank you." I looked at the bouquet, pure white tied with a silver gray ribbon. No roses, no heavy scent, just a soft fragrance like morning dew. "Have you forgiven them?" I asked quietly. Emily's voice was calm. "Not yet. But I'm tired, Dad. Sometimes forgiveness just means not talking about it anymore." That evening I sat listening to the local radio. They replayed a program I once sent my story to, a story about a father watching his daughter take revenge with a glue that couldn't be undone. The host ended with a line I'll never forget. "Some wounds don't need bandages, because time is the only glue strong enough to hold a broken heart together." I looked out toward the sea. The waves still rolled and the sand was still white, and the sky wider than ever. Inside the shop, Emily stood in the warm light, her shadow stretching softly across the floor, a small trace of hope in the dark. I smiled. Maybe after all this, justice isn't about punishment. It's about how we choose to keep living after the pain. And for me, as long as my daughter still has the strength to smile, that's enough. Thank you for staying with me until the end of this story. If it touched something inside you, please like, share, and subscribe so you won't miss the next stories where every tragedy carries a lesson about humanity, love, and forgiveness. See you in the next video.